We will now call this meeting to order of the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board for...
Recording in progress.
I'll start over. We now call this meeting to order for the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board for August 16th, 2023. This meeting is being held in Sacramento, and it's also being broadcast on Zoom. I'm going to do a roll call of our members. Please show Chair Allen present. Vice Chair Kent-Monning.
Present.
Member Wysocki.
Here.
Member Ng. My understanding, so did I hear it? I hear? Okay, so we thank you for joining us. We weren't sure you were online, so thank you. So the second item of business, with all members being here, is the approval of the July the approval of the July 2023 minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the July minutes?
So moved.
Vice Chair Kent-Monning.
Aye.
Ng.
Aye.
Wachowski.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So please show that the July 2023 minutes have been adopted by the board unanimously. The next thing on the agenda is my report from the chair. I guess the first thing I would bring up is just that on behalf of this board and our agency, our heart goes out to the folks in Hawaii on Maui for the disaster. Being a sister state that has had many wildfires and understand the pain and dislocation, all I can say is our hearts are with you, our support is with you, and that with heavy hearts we'll do this meeting knowing that so many people are suffering with this wildfire disaster. With my report, I'll just note that our meetings are usually fairly short, sometimes an hour, maybe a little bit longer, but most of the work done by this board is done doing cases during the month. And so with that, I will report out that our fellow board members have closed a very good amount of second-level appeals since the last meeting. The board closed out 1,134 cases on appeal since we last met, and of those, 181 were done through CAMS, our new system that we're using. While the board was resolving second-level appeals, the field offices resolved thousands of cases, and in the reports, we'll report out how many thousands of cases. But just so the public understands, so we're still working our way through the pandemic. Our caseloads are still heavy. We are working our way forward. I happen to be very fortunate that I served for many years when we were meeting all our standards with flying colors. But I do know that when I first joined this board 10 years ago, we were struggling with the Great Recession, and we had a similar situation. So we're working our way through the inventory of cases, and God knows we want to resolve cases as rapidly and as fairly as we can. So with that, I think it's only correct and proper that I thank all the levels of the organization, our appeals judges, the staff that supports them, all our field offices, our IT department that basically I have to call very rarely, and I appreciate that. Our appellate judge operations, the administrative services that we get. We're going to be reviewing the budget today, which is a big part of our duty to review and approve today, and we'll be doing that today as well. So having said that, I will turn it over to my fellow board members for their reports or comments. So I'll start with Vice Chair Kent-Monning.
Thank you, Chair Allen. I don't have an official report today, and as usual, just wanted to highlight how impressed I am with the work in the field. July, understandably, is when people take their well-deserved vacations, and I understand that there were a lot of people on vacation, rightfully so, but the field still closed 28,594 cases. So still an impressive workload, even when people are rightfully enjoying some well-deserved time off. So thanks to everyone in the field and also at AO. Impressive numbers still, and to my colleagues for supporting me with my time off that I took. Thank you for working on all of those cases this month.
Thank you. Member Wachowski.
I have nothing to report this month.
So you do not want to report on your bear attack. I understand. It's traumatic. So we'll move to Member Ng. Do you have anything to report? Is Member Ng there online, or did we lose him?
I believe he's present.
He's online. He is muted.
So I did not hear. So, Member Ng, can you hear me? Do you have anything to report or any comments?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well, I'll just make it very brief. Mr. Chair and members and our team here, thank you very much for accommodating me during the past few weeks. I also wanted to thank Presiding Judge Whalen for her assistance in my participation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
My report.
Thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is the part of our agenda for public comment, which is agenda number 5, which is anytime we have this part of the agenda, it's open to public comment. Usually we can take it in person or via Zoom. So I'd ask the moderator, are there any members of the public waiting to be heard?
Morning, Chair Allen. I have no hands raised for public comment at this time.
Okay. So hearing that, what we'll do is move to item 6 of our agenda, report by Executive Director, Chief Judge Michael Kutry.
Morning, Chair Allen and board members. I'll give you a brief update on the field workload and timeliness and some of the other events that the field has experienced since the last meeting. Of course, saving time for Mr. Silva's budget presentation this afternoon, or this morning rather. As noted by Vice Chair Kent Monning, the field issued over 28,000 decisions in July. That's a bit lower than we've come to expect after the high water months of April and May, but it's still a very high level of production from our field offices, especially given that we've accomplished 2 major CAMS rollouts in the last 2 months. We have attrition and usual high levels of leave taken during the summer months. Our incoming monthly appeals continue their 7-month decline, dropping another 5% in July. Our open inventory of UI and PUA cases in the field dropped again in June by about 3,000 cases, which brings the total to about 22% reduction in that inventory since January. So we're headed in the right direction. 30 and 45-day time lapse remain in the single digits, which is expected while we focus on our average case age. That average case age continues to fluctuate by a few points each month. In July, it reached 139.8 days, a slight increase over last month, largely due to the employee leave, which we discussed a moment ago. A higher relative percentage of disability appeals, which do not count towards the national average, but we still compare quite favorably to the last reported month nationally, which is 179 days average case age across the country. So we expect to stay ahead of that, and as we come out of the summer months and finish our CAMS rollouts, we expect that monthly production to reach those highs that we had early in the year. Along those lines, we're continuing to welcome new staff and judges to our field offices. Training cohort 18 for new judges just finished its initial training. Those 7 new ALJs are already hearing cases for their respective offices. We anticipate 2 smaller training cohorts in September and October. And then Judge Morrison out of the San Diego office will pivot to provide all of those new judges with follow-up training on more complex issues. Willoughby is going to talk to you a little bit about the CAMS progress, but a high-level overview is that we just finished the Inglewood rollout. So that office is a big office. It is now fully integrated into the CAMS system. Inland is next, another good-sized office, but the way it's been going has been very smooth, and we don't anticipate any hiccups there either. In September, we'll resume meeting with the U.S. Department of Labor Region 6 to assess our backlog progress. And we are still engaged with Department of Labor's vendor for process improvement, equity, and fraud prevention. So we went through extensive interviews with that vendor in the last couple months, and we're waiting to see if they have anything to offer us in terms of process solution. Since the last meeting, there was 1 security event to report. San Diego office staff received threats of violence from a caller. CHP promptly intervened and brought the matter to a close, and the conduct has since stopped. So I'd like to thank our partners at CHP for being so engaged with us when we need them. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Well, the security for our staff and for the public is really important, and I appreciate that we have a security report every month because it's very important. I know to myself and the board that our staff is safe and the public is as well. The only thing I'd add before I turn it over to questions is that sometimes in government and sometimes in business, we're guilty of acronyms. So just one more, I think I have it right. It's California Appeals Management System is CAMS. Is that correct? Yes, okay. So for members of the public who might be listening, we're not talking about car parts. We're talking about the new technological improvement to make it more user-friendly for the public and for more expeditious handling of our cases. So having said that, I'll hand it over to our Vice Chair, Kent Monty.
Thank you, Chair Allen. I don't have any questions, just thank you for the thorough report.
I have a question. As we transfer over to more cases under CAMS, we get assignments only 2 days a week from the CAM system and the other legacy system we get. When do you envision that changing as the amount of cases increase?
So we have a gradual plan to move all into CAMS in the appeal process, but the the board appeals trail the field level decisions by quite a bit.
Yeah.
On average. So when they start in the legacy system, they still come in the legacy system. So it's going to be some time until all parties or most parties will be hitting that board appeal button in the digitized system so that you would get it in that same fashion. So Judge Bach does have a plan to bring everybody in, but it's going perhaps a little slower than we anticipated because of that lag between legacy and CAMS. But we do anticipate at some point making the final push to bring everything into CAMS that comes in, because we can't continue to operate in two systems. So that's probably by the end of the calendar year, we'll have that methodology in place, and then all of a sudden, you won't get anything else in legacy.
So will we see a switch where all of a sudden every day we'll be getting, as this transfers, every day we'll get some CAMS, some F files, and then at some time we'll open up the F file and there'll be no cases there anymore. They'll just be,
I think it'll go gradual and then sudden, and we'll give you a warning when we're about to make the move on that.
And which is the next office to go under our system?
The inland office.
Inland office.
Yeah.
No more questions.
Okay. Member Ring, do you have any questions? Judge Coutre.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief Coutre, for the report. And number one, thanks for always being available and between meetings. Secondly, I just wanted to confirm that it appears that the CAM rollout is on schedule and should be completed at all field offices by the beginning of January. Are we still on schedule for that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And with any dates for technological improvements, it's always aspirational, in my opinion. So let me move on here. Now we have a report from someone who's having a birthday soon, if not today, I'm not sure which day, but we have Rebecca Bach, who's a supervising administrative law judge for the Appellate Operations Branch, and she's going to give us an update on the state of our appellate workload.
Good morning. It's Sunday.
Sunday.
That is correct.
Coming Sunday?
This coming Sunday.
Okay.
Yes.
Important to know. Okay.
Okay, yes. So at Appellate Operations, thanks to all the good work of the board members and the quick work of the field to get us their cases, we were able to close 59.6% of our cases for the month of July within 45 days. The Department of Labor guidelines is to close 50% of our cases within 45 days. So we exceeded that quite nicely. The Department of Labor guidelines is to close 80% of our cases within 75 days, and we were a little bit lower on that, 68.8, bringing our year average to 79.9, which some might argue is 80 if you round it up. But I think that that number is very good considering the amount of vacations that we had this last month, and we still managed to close quite a hefty load. And our case aging popped up momentarily due to those reasons. But
carry on.
Yes, thank you. But it was for my birthday, I think. But I anticipate that the case staging, which is right now at 47.7, we want it to be at 40 or less, and I anticipate we'll be back at the 40 or less next month. So was good teamwork all around. And that's the end of my report this month. I'm going to keep it short in respect for the
Well, thank you
financial.
very much for your report, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues here on the board. I'll begin with our vice chair.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Thank you, Supervising Judge Bach.
No questions.
Member Eng. We wait a minute for Member Eng because it's,
Can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Judge Bob, thanks as always, and no questions, but I appreciate the opportunity to have options when members are away to review the cases and give the approval. Thank you.
And Member Eng, we appreciate your participation. Sometimes when you do this with technological challenges, it's not so easy, but I thank you for your attendance and being with us today. So,
You see my high tech, my abilities are in full.
thank you. So, having the report from our supervising law judge, we're going to turn now to our Chief Information Officer, Jeff Willoughby, for his report.
Good morning, Chair Allen and
Morning.
members of the board. The IT report this month will also be brief, so Chief Silva can dazzle us with his budget presentation. This month, we, as mentioned, did complete ALJ training in our Inglewood office, and our Inland office will launch next. And I'm sort of going over already worn road here, but our target is still end of year to roll out the rest of the field offices. So we remain fairly confident that even as an estimation, is going to be darn close. On the system stabilization front, we recently demonstrated the partially completed multi-language framework for the My Appeal portal pages to our IT governance team. And we anticipate we'll have the full Spanish version ready for testing next week, with additional languages under translation as we speak. So we have a full slate of work to follow, and of course, I will keep you apprised of our progress as we go through this effort. One of the interesting observations that we've been able to make over the past several months is that while feedback on our My Appeal FAQ webpage has been a little sparse, it occasionally lines up really well with things that we already have prioritized to do. So, for example, we received a comment recently regarding access to multiple cases by a single organization. And that's already on our priority list of things to get done during the stabilization effort. And we'll continue to track the commentary and improve the FAQ page itself, because those questions and comments often reappear with answers attached to them. And we'll, of course, when we see it as something reasonable and achievable, we'll enhance the system in alignment with those requests and suggestions. So that feedback is an important part of how we have stakeholders chime in and the public at large. So we do take it seriously. So that is my brief report for this month.
Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleagues here. So, Vice Chair?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Willoughby. No questions, just a comment and appreciation for your team. I think it's really spectacular that while we're still rolling this system out to new field offices, we're already gathering feedback and trying to enhance it and make it work as best as it can for the public, for our purposes. So I know that's a tremendous amount of person hours, and I just think it's really exciting to hear how much improving and curating we're doing already, even though it hasn't even been rolled out throughout the whole state. So thank you very much.
Member Wachowski.
I'm going to save my questions for the budget discussion because I have some of the line items on the operations. I want to understand it better, so I'll hold.
Okay. And Member Eng, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, thank you for your report, and I just had a question. I think I may have heard that CAMS is currently used by about 25% of all the parties. That was, I guess, somewhat expected. Are you able to tell us about the characteristics or demographics or anything that would inform us as to the other 75% that are not using CAMS and how our information on them might inform us as to perhaps increasing the number of users and decreasing the number of non-users?
So I believe your percentage is fairly close for appellants who use the public portal in order to access their case information. We anticipate that will continue to improve over time, sort of as the footprint of the system itself ends up being statewide. We have not done a deep dive yet in terms of trying to suss out the who does and who does not specifically access the system and for what reasons. Although that could be a good sort of path to dive down. At this point, our focus is obviously on making sure we get the most stable system out into the public as we can. And I think that like many public-facing interactions, you're going to find that over time, the percentage tends to creep up and not jump up. We have a system in place where if you do avail yourself of the information that's out on the website, it's relatively easy to navigate your way through that part of the process. I would say from personal experience, once you know, you go. But if you don't, you might not. So we can certainly parse out some of the statistical segments. But at this point in time, I'm not sure if there is a magic way to get people who aren't already going out and looking for information on our organization to spontaneously know how to go to the portal.
Okay, well, thank you. I think as we continue to move on, I do think it is a concern that we know why some users are not using it, whether it's language ability or lack of Wi-Fi capability or other ones, other reasons. So perhaps as we get closer to completing our targets and after maybe the beginning of next year, that could be something that we might look into. And that would be my continuing request for information. But I thank you and I appreciate all that's been done so far to get the 25% to use our system. And that's not been an easy task as well. I have nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have one question. How are we doing on the language accessibility? Because I know you were working on that.
Right. So it requires that a framework be built, and I was trying to think of a reasonable analogy. The framework being the actual superstructure of a home. The languages themselves, once the home is built, are the paint that you can put on each one, that house, and it's relatively easy to paint as long as the house is already there. So that framework is being built and completed as we speak.
Okay.
And that I mentioned a partial demonstration. We have about half of those pages translated and in place today for Spanish. But once that framework is there, painting is the relatively easy part. So once that construct is finished, and I think it's going to be finished this week, I could see my application development team like starting rivulets of sweat come down their foreheads. The other languages should be very quickly following. So I think in terms of testing, we'll see Spanish come out this week or next week. For test, we'll go through every single page, every file, every click, every text box, make certain that it appears correctly and is obviously translated correctly. Then we'll promote that out and push it out into production. That'll go. And then as soon as we have the translations done for the other languages, very quickly on the heels of that.
Thank you. That visual analogy was really helpful to me. I mean, although I was foolish enough when I was young to paint my own house, and so I would defer as to how easy it is to do a good job painting your own house. But and not a question, but one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, it's with our legacy system. Our legacy system is the e-file that we presently use for the bulk of our cases still. I noticed that when we did the last upgrade, there was some sort of upgrade done, maybe in Word, or I don't know what it was, but the system that used to work really, really well still works and it's usable, but the only word I came up with is glitchy. It's like it has a glitch to it, where sometimes it's hard to finish off. And I thought it was just me because, but apparently, at least I know from at least one of my colleagues, that they're experiencing the same thing. It's minor. It doesn't keep us from doing our cases, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take a look at it.
Okay, so now we turn to our esteemed Robert Silva, our Chief Administrative Services Officer, who's going to take us through our budget for this coming year, the 2023-2024 budget proposal. And so I will tell the other board members that I have previewed this with our chief judge and gone over it, but I'm leaving it to you to ask all the questions that you want to, because we want to make sure that all the board is comfortable and understands our budget. So having said that, I'm going to first turn it over to our vice chair and then to all the other members to ask your questions regarding the budget.
Can we hear Mr. Silva's presentation first and then ask our questions
absolutely.
after?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Well, good morning, board members. I'll jump right into it since that was the lead-in. Again, I'm going to go over our budget authority for 2023-24. Doesn't appear to be working. Just a slight delay. Sorry about that. But don't go too far. I'm kidding. Anyways, yes, we're going to go over the budget authority and the branch allocations for state fiscal year 23-24. That's working beautifully. So to the next slide, as we entered the 2022-23 state fiscal year, CUIAB's base budget for personal services as well as the operating expenses and equipment for state fiscal year 2023-24 was projected to be $70.5 million. For the October 22 budget revise, there was an overall decrease in the overall UI program of 867.1 positions due to projected decreases in initial claims, weeks claimed, non-monetary determinations, and appeals. CUIAB's small share of that overall decrease was 3.1 positions. So that's the accompanying $200,000 decrease you see there to budget authority from the October 22 revise. A half year later, for the May 23 budget revise, CUIAB's UI workload projections for the 2023-24 fiscal year were increased by 12,420 cases. So this resulted in an increase of 12.7 temporary help positions and an accompanying $1.4 million budget increase for salaries. Moving to the next line, SEIU's current contract expired on June 23, but over the past 3 years, all SEIU represented employees enrolled in a CalPERS health plan received a monthly health care stipend of $260. This is one of it ended as of the last fiscal year, but it's one of the issues currently under bargaining. Included in our budget authority is $800,000 to continue to pay for this if it becomes an ongoing expenditure after the conclusion of the bargaining. If this doesn't get bargained into the new SEIU contract, finance will subsequently remove it from our budget authority. And finally, the case represented employees bargained into their recent contract a 3% general salary increase for 23-24, as well as a 4.5% special salary adjustment for those employees currently at the maximum of the pay scale. And all these transactions have been keyed retroactively to July 1st of 23. And we haven't yet been given budget authority for these pay increases, but we estimate that it will be an additional $1.7 million salaries augmentation. Again, SEIU represented employees are still in the bargaining phase, and any budget authority augmentation for pay increases resulting from that process will be handled after their contract is finalized. So with that, our estimated budget for state fiscal year 23-24 for both personal services and OE&E is $74.2 million. So this slide will break out our different budget sources. Just under 92% of CUIB's budget is federal funding to administer the unemployment insurance appeals cases, as well as the unemployment portion of our tax hearings, and of course the pandemic-related unemployment assistance programs. Just under 7% comes from state funds to administer disability insurance and paid family leave appeals cases, as well as the disability portion of our tax hearings. 1% of our budget comes from the state's general fund for the personal income tax portions of our employer tax hearings. And then we also receive a minute bit of funding each year from the Department of Child Support Services to hear cases on the unemployment and disability child support intercept program, as well as a small amount of funding to hear non-industrial disability insurance cases, DI cases for state employees. I think last year we did 6 of those cases, those NDI cases. So just a very small piece of our pie. So in this slide, there are some larger ticket expenditures for 2023-24 that I want to identify for the board, starting with staffing increases. Beginning with the staffing levels CUIB had as of June 30th, 2023, the budget that we're proposing includes salaries for an additional 79 positions. These positions include 17 ALJ positions, 57 support staff positions, and 5 other leadership and administrative positions. We will continually analyze the attrition and geographic staffing needs and the workload to determine where and when we will fill these positions, as well as at which classification is appropriate to fill certain support staff positions in our field operations offices. This hiring effort projects to be roughly $5.7 million. The second line is for the replacement of the modular systems furniture for our pellet operations, which is currently the oldest in the department and is due for replacement, and I think they're well deserving of this. The third line is a $100,000 line item for the replacement of some of IT's older data storage equipment. So this is really about it for larger ticket expenditure items for 2023-24. So over the next 3 slides, I'm going to focus on the allocations for operating expenses and equipment. Starting with these specific budget call letter categories, these are the categories in which all members of CUIB branch management engage in the request process every February. This slide shows the differences between the proposed allocations for 23-24 and what the board approved for state fiscal year 22-23. Over the first 4 lines, you'll see some significant decreases from purchases from last year. I'll kind of go over them. The very top line, the 79% decrease for equipment is mostly due to the fact that we purchased 27 copiers last fiscal year that were at their replacement schedule, and this year we're only slated to replace 5. So you see that large drop off there. The 64% decrease for data processing or IT equipment in line 2 is due to the fact that we had a large ticket IT security hardware firewall equipment replacement, which was a one-time purchase last fiscal year that we're not seeing this fiscal year. On line 4, the large decrease in software purchasing is the fact that we did have to purchase $150,000 worth of software last fiscal year that was for the California Appeals Management System implementation, CAMS. So the following line, which represents ongoing maintenance and licensing agreements, the $311,000 or 22% increase you see is due to two factors. The first is an increase in the overall licensing for our CAM system between the fiscal years. And the second is an increase in the cost for our statewide copier maintenance service agreements. Moving down a couple of lines, the large increase you're seeing for premise alterations is due to the aforementioned modular furniture project we want to do in the appellate operations. So overall, you'll see that the total for approved call letter requests is consistent with last fiscal year, with only a 1% increase between the two fiscal years. So moving to the next slide, these are the ongoing costs that make up the majority of the OE&E budget. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, the overall proposed allocation increase is just 1%. But there are some line items I would like to specifically address before the board, assuming there may be questions with them. So the first one I want to discuss is the top line, which is a significant increase in postage costs. I want to provide some background to explain why you see what you see. When we presented last fiscal year's budget to the board in August of 2022, we didn't yet have the final expenditure documents for for the previous fiscal year, which is typical. You don't usually get them till early September. But the documents that we did have at the time projected that we would spend roughly $600,000 in postage for that fiscal year. So with that projection, we added some additional funding to get to $616,000, which you see is what the board approved last year for postage. After the board adopted last fiscal year's budget and we subsequently received final expenditure reporting, and we ended up spending $702,000 for postage that fiscal year. Even if those earlier projections would have shown a $700,000 projected expenditure at the time of the board meeting, and we could have planned accordingly, we still would have fallen well short of what became the true postage expenditures for the 2022-23 fiscal year, which are now projecting to be just under $900,000. And again, we don't have final expenditure reporting for last fiscal year, but those are what the projections are as of now. So the main reasons for this significant increase in postage are that we disposed of the most cases last fiscal year that we had in almost a decade. Well, in a decade, actually. And unlike a decade ago, the majority of CUIAB's hearings are now done by telephone, which requires that the hearing documents get mailed to the parties ahead of the hearing, thereby driving up the postage cost. With our current expenditures for last fiscal year projecting to be just under $900,000, we've decided to keep that allocation for the 2023-24 fiscal year. With this locked in as the allocation, and assuming our workload level will remain near the same as it is in the current year, we still presume that postage costs will actually be decreasing, with CAMS being fully implemented for about 6 months of the 23-24 fiscal year. Obviously, that provides the opportunity for more parties to connect to us through the electronic portal to review the hearing documents. So I hope that background explanation explains why you see this really large jump between fiscal year allocations for postage costs. So the next line in office supplies, you see a 20% decrease in allocation from last fiscal year. And the reason for this is because we have already experienced savings in 22-23 due to the rollout of CAMS and the accompanying lack of need for hard copy file-related office supplies. So we feel that these costs will continue to decrease as we progress through 23-24, and we get full implementation of CAMS. But we've decided to keep what we're projecting to spend in 22-23 as the allocation for 23-24, which is $296,000. Because this is an expenditure category. It's mostly transacted at the local level. And we don't want to tie anyone's hands. We want to make sure that everyone has what they need as they need it to continue with our mission. We don't want them to feel that they have to cut their costs. But again, we feel we won't even see the $296,000 expenditure we've proposed. The next line, interpreter services. With our extremely high workload of last fiscal year, we are projecting currently to spend $1.1 million last fiscal year for expenditures, for interpreters, excuse me. So we're carrying over that amount as our 23-24 allocation to cover us under the assumption that our workload in the 23-24 fiscal year will be at or near last fiscal year. In this slide, I don't know that there are really any other areas of concern, but I'm happy to take any questions on them. I will say that I'll draw your attention to roughly the middle of the slide. You'll see a significant 30% reduction in projected phone costs, very significant at $160,000 between fiscal years. And that's Jeff Kumanchik in IT has done yeoman's work in finding cost-effective ways to update our telecom systems without any negative service to the public we serve. So thank you, Jeff. A person you know well, obviously. So again, to reiterate, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, the overall proposed allocation increase between fiscal years is just 1%.
So I'd ask the board members for at least this part of the presentation. Do you have any questions, clarifications?
Thank you, Chair. I just had one question to follow up, Chief Silva. If what you had explained about the interpreter services, I might have misheard, but it sounded as though you were saying it's relatively the same from last year, but I do see a $100,000 decrease. So if you could just explain a little bit more if that's related to the demand for it, or what's the basis for that change?
Looking a year ago, looking at what would be the projected workload for last fiscal year, we developed a $1.2 million allocation, assuming that's about where we would spend, but we ended up spending just under that. We're just under 1.1 million for the 22-23 fiscal year. I can't break down as to why it came up $100,000 short of what we thought it would be, but our assumption is if we expended that much last fiscal year and with similar workload this fiscal year, that would be enough allocation to cover that particular category.
Great, I understand that better now. And then if it turns out that there is a higher demand, I imagine it just ebbs and flows based on how the cases kind of shake down about the language needs. But do we have the ability to spend more than that if it's necessary?
We absolutely do, and I believe I'll cover that later in the
great.
presentation, but satisfactorily, I believe so.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Member Wachowski.
On page 2 of the report, the $800,000 for the healthcare stipend, was that a COVID-related augmentation for healthcare? How is that? How did that create it?
That was bargained into the SEIU's contract 3 fiscal years ago. I'm trying to think of how they dubbed it. It was the improving affordability and access to health care that they had bargained into their contract to receive that stipend. And I don't know.
Because I was just thinking if it was because of this, the COVID, people, we've had challenges in healthcare in general, I guess is a good way to put it. So I guess my question is, was that a one-time thing or was that,
It hadn't been previously done. So at the time, it was a one-time thing bargained into that contract.
Okay. On the personnel, when we have our 17 new judges, there are some judges that are retiring. These 17 are additional to whatever that baseline is. There's not an overlap between some new judges and retiring judges.
Correct. So excuse me one second. The budget includes room, if you will, to hire 17 ALJs in addition to the staffing we had as of June 30th. And the budget also includes those 17 ALJs budgeted for the entire fiscal year. We're 6 weeks in, and those 17 haven't come yet already. But any attritions would be backfills, and this would not dig into the attrition. Would be someone leaves, we can replace them without it impacting the 17 positions I referred to.
And the support staff in the field, I'm familiar with the traditional courtroom model where you have your clerk, you have the bailiff, you have people that are in the courtroom. That's not our world now. It's all remote. It's over the telephone. So how has that, who has been added or who has been subtracted, I guess?
The classifications of our support staff haven't changed between the periods. So we have, our offices are bifurcated into what's called record control and what's called calendaring and registering of the cases. They have office assistants, office technicians, management services technicians, and a program technician 3 who assigns the cases. Those were the classifications we used 10 years ago. They're the classifications we use today. Some of them are on a hybrid telework schedule because their job duties afford them the opportunity to do that. But others must be in the office at all times because you're answering phones and things of that nature.
Okay. On the operating costs, once upon a time I was a bankruptcy attorney, and we used to make 6 copies that had to be filed with the court, and our postage and the copying. I know about Xerox machines, or copier machines. Again, we're in a different world now. So we got 24 machines last year. We got 5 machines this year. With the CAM system and with the electronic, we simply will not be using those machines as much as in the heyday. Walk me through because the people who sell us those machines will tell you, you need to buy a new one every 4 years, okay? It's
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, right. Those salespeople are special. They always come in, and that's part of their job. How do you see that asset life being extended, or familiarize me with this?
Sure. The numbers you mentioned that I had mentioned earlier, was 27 and 5 or wherever it was. We still have many other copy machines deployed in addition to those statewide. We have replaced our copy machines at year 5, which is the normal replacement schedule. And you're absolutely right. We've been discussing this ad nauseum in IT and administrative services, that with the rollout of CAMs, duplication almost becomes wholly unnecessary. Now, printing is still quite necessary until such time that a larger percentage of people access us through the portal. So when we're mailing documents to people, instead of having a file that you're copying several times, you simply hit print 4 copies and it prints. You're not duplicating, you're only printing. So the 5 copy machines that we're replacing this year are the last that we're replacing on a 5-year schedule, and we're going to research this year to see how we can decrease the amount of specific copy machines in our field offices. Now, there's another angle to this, that most copy machines are now multifunction printers, and so we have to look at the cost effectiveness of having functioning printers that can do what we need to do without the duplication aspect. If it's a cost savings, we'll move to printers strictly. And I've already been discussing this with a lot of supervising LJs and others, and they're having some apprehension about giving up copy machines. But CAMS is in its infancy, so I think this attitude is going to change over the coming months.
Like our fax machines, it's sometimes, if you can find one with the bar,
The thermal paper.
thermal paper that comes in, I know people get nervous about that, but as we move in and the users are moving it, I'm just suggesting, or just hoping that we're looking at it where maybe the 5-year model that's recommended, because we use it less, we get a more length out of it. And
Oh, absolutely.
Public always likes when we save money. Right?
Yeah, we did ramp, we had a very, very consistent post-recession copier deployment that we did increase the amount of machines a few years ago when our current workload shot way up. But now we're definitely in the mode of reducing the machines. And I didn't get it deep into the weeds about our maintenance agreements, but we've changed our maintenance agreements around so that the coverage is not based on the number of copies you make. So if a copier sits there and is making less and less copies, it can last 10 years as opposed to 5. That's the model we would like to look for moving forward.
And one final question, Mr. Chair. Under the e-file system, I had this vision that boxes of files would be packed up and put in, trucks and shipped over to a different office so people could look at them, and that was constantly making copies, moving them. That is going away. That is going away. Where is that in the budget? Or
There are a couple areas. Well, actually, it's right here. So if you look second to the last line under other services, what you have covered under that is confidential destruct. We have trucks that come to each of our locations. When files are ready to be destroyed, they confidentially destruct them there. We also have some space issues in some of our offices, and because of the cases aren't ready to be destroyed yet, we still have to have them for petitions for writ of mandate or other purposes. We store them at the State Records Center, which is here in West Sacramento. And those costs are seen in other services as well. So those are going to greatly decrease as we progress with CAMs.
very good. Thanks.
Yes, Member Ng, for this portion of the presentation, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the report. Hold on. I wanted to ask a question about Mrs. Brent, the last line of the slide. I have a general question. I know a little bit about an office that I used to deal with before, during, and after COVID, and the hybrid loss of personnel kind of led to a decrease in projected rent, maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. Has COVID affected us in any way that would cause a decrease, or are there other factors that would result for an increase in these items?
So I think I understood the gist of the question. Firstly, the rent costs have slightly increased over the last few fiscal years in our agreements, as you see here. This is just essentially a general increase in yearly rent. I think you were mentioning with regard to COVID-19 and the telework, if we could shrink our footprint lease-wise. Is that what you were referring to, Member Ng?
Do we have, as a result of COVID, do we have more positions that are either hybrid or on remote, or are we kind of returning to pre-COVID?
I'm sorry, it was breaking up. I didn't hear the question clearly. I apologize.
Member Ng, why don't you repeat the question?
My question is, and I just generally wanted to know why we are not increasing our ongoing costs as a code. I think you kind of explained that because the rent has gone up, and perhaps we don't have many newly created hybrid positions. People aren't needing the space. Is that kind of like what you're saying?
Let me help. Maybe the way I interpret the question, and please feel free to help with this. What I'm interpreting is that I think what Member Ng is saying is we're coming back from the pandemic and we're more in the physical workplace now. And he's just questioning whether the small amount of increase really will cover if, in fact, we more normalize our operations over the next year. I think that's what he's asking.
I heard him asking whether there are actually any decreases that may have happened since COVID, and since COVID very much changed how we use physical space. I had a similar question for Chief Kutry, actually, and understand that there may have been significant savings in prior fiscal years related to some of that, possibly.
Well, to address that first, obviously, we did have, and we still continue to have hybrid workforce, which in theory reduces the real estate need for people to be in offices. In our specific field offices, we haven't had the opportunity to shrink our overall footprint in the lease agreement because the lease agreements were in the middle of the term. So we couldn't strike while the iron was hot, essentially, and so which would have, in theory, reduced our lease costs. And with more and more people now reporting to the office, maybe it's a good thing we didn't do that because we do need space for these people to report to the office. And we're in a couple of buildings, one in Oakland and one in Los Angeles, where they're state-owned buildings. So there's not much we can do with regard to the changing of the leases there, as far as reducing the footprint. It's been quite a few years since we've significantly reduced a footprint. We did so in our San Diego office a number of years ago through a then lease agreement. We were able to kind of shrink down our area there for lease savings.
Member Ng, is the answer you're getting what you were looking for? Yes?
Thank you to Chair and the Vice Chair for being a relay for my questions. Those were the questions, and I appreciate the answer, and I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a follow-up question on that?
Of course.
Because I know state agencies rent lots of private office space, and we have lots of state offices that are maybe not in the best shape, but I know in San Jose, we're closing a state office because it was built once upon a time. Do we naturally work with general services to look if, for instance, other state agencies are shrinking their footprint because of the hybrid work model? Are we looking for opportunities in the Inland Empire, Inglewood, all these areas where we have field offices to cohabitate with another state agency other than the traditional state building?
Yes, and it goes both ways. Obviously, we're under Labor and Workforce Development Agency, so for all of our partner departments, we have that conduit to Labor Agency, and they'll come to us whether they want space of ours or whether we may need space elsewhere. And then we also have facilities analysts in administrative services whose finger is on the pulse of the DGS availability. For instance, to give you an example of both, we have in San Francisco, when we were somewhat forced out of the city due to incredibly high costs, we have a hearing outstation in a Department of Industrial Relations area. So we're actually leasing a small amount of space from them. And then conversely, we have Agricultural Labor Relations Board is leasing some space from us in our Oxnard Office of Appeals. So we try to keep those feelers out there all the time to see where we can save cost.
So why don't we move on to the next part of the budget? I just would make the comment that they've been talking now for 15 years about the paperless office. And I would just point out that when the automobile came in, horses were around for another 30, 40, 50 years until they've been supplanted pretty much. So I think we're making progress in this area, but we're far from a paperless society and offices. So why don't we move on with the presentation?
There still are horses, aren't there?
Yes, there still are horses. We just use them, not, and hopefully we'll stop horse racing in general, but that's another issue.
Okay, so just to sum up, for all operating expenses, the proposed 2023-24 allocation is $200,000 more than what the board approved as last year's allocation. So this slide shows our overall personal services budget. Last fiscal year, the board approved a budget of 516 positions and $52.4 million. for 2023-24. Based on the requests from branch management, we are proposing a budget of 518.5 positions and $55.2 million in salaries. Now, you'll notice that the dollar increase of 2.7 million between fiscal years seems high for only a 2.5 position increase. But that's driven by the salary increases for case represented employees that I discussed earlier, with roughly half of CUIB's employees receiving a 3.5% pay increase and almost half of them receiving a 7.5% pay increase. Our overall salary has increased by, our average salary, has increased by $5,000 per year, roughly. So I want to reiterate that this is a comparison of the total positions we're requesting for this fiscal year compared with what was approved for last fiscal year, and that the reduction shown here in the middle column of 13.5 temporary help position equivalents does not mean that there will be any reduction of CUIB's workforce or anyone losing a position. So last fiscal year's allocation for overtime was $1.1 million. That's what we expended in fiscal year 2021-22, and we ended up expending just under that, about 93% of the total in 22-23. With the last two fiscal years being such high workload years, and with the ability in CAMS to more easily move workload between offices, we expect to see this expenditure category actually reduce as 23-24 progresses. However, we have decided to carry over the same $1.1 million allocation just in case there are any recruitment or attrition issues that happen during the course of the year. We can use overtime as a tool to mitigate any slowdown in production. And last fiscal year's allocation for lump sum payouts was $492,000, and we ended up spending $453,000. So what we've done historically is we carry over the previous year's lump sum allocation for the coming fiscal year, while also taking into account any planned retirements that we know about with people who may have a high-end lump sum payout. So this year, we actually are aware of some planned retirements for the 23-24 fiscal year for employees carrying a larger leave balance. So we factored in those employees' leave balances as projected lump sum payments and have added them to last year's total. So we've increased this fiscal year's allocation by 57% to cover, again, what we project will be specific people retiring with larger lump sum payouts. Okay, to this slide, to the far right, in the highlighted area on the text, it shows the total base budget of $107.5 million and the branch requests totaling $104.6 million. These are the budget totals that include personal benefits. So I wanted to be able to show you where we align with the governor's budget, which obviously includes what's PB, which is personnel benefits. The governor's budget for CUIAB for 2023-24, as of now, is $104.7 million. But this estimate here of $107.5 million includes the dollars we will soon receive for the pay increases for the case represented employees. So moving back to the left, you'll see that even with the proposal of adding 79 positions over our staffing as of June 30th, we're still projecting a budget reserve in salaries of almost $1.7 million. We're also projecting to have a reserve in OE&E of $200,000 for a total projected reserve of $1.9 million, which is 3% of the $74 million allocation. That's not a large reserve amount, but again, I want to reiterate what I discussed before, which is the 79 positions I mentioned, that those would be in place for 12 months of the full fiscal year, and that's obviously not going to happen. So we will see significant personnel salary savings as the year progresses. And if needed, any savings in salaries can be utilized to cover shortages in OE&E. So here is just simply the percentage breakdowns of both positions in dollars. Obviously, the majority of our positions are permanent full-time positions, and you'll see that the allocation of $1.1 million for overtime is roughly 2% of our total, 2% of our position equivalent. And then to the right, you'll see that our budget is basically, salaries and wages are about 3/4 of the total, with OE&E being about 1/4 of the total. So this is the overall view of where we are with the budget, looking at, again, a $1.9 million built-in reserve. And this slide simply shows the breakdown, the percentage shares between the 5 branches within CUIAB. And these percentage shares are consistent with the 2022-23 fiscal year, with the pellet share being just over 4%, administrative services at 6%, IT just under 9%, and executive branch at 4%, and obviously the lion's share being in the field at 77% of the budget share. And that concludes my report, although I would like to, before questions, publicly thank Valerie Graziano of Administrative Services, who, this is very high-level review, but she goes line by line by line, thousands and thousands of lines all year long, both in personnel and OE&E, and she really keeps on top of our budget, and she does a fantastic job. So thank you, Valerie.
No, thank you for the presentation, but I'm sure there's some more questions that want to be asked by the board members. So for my colleagues, any questions?
I actually, just one question. I think you explained this now I'm on the wrong part of the presentation here, but I think your explanation tied into what my question was before in terms of the flexibility that we have in terms of the savings that salaries might project and the ability to use that, right? So that was my main question, and I think you explained it well. So thank you.
No challenges, no questions, I think.
Member Eng.
No questions. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. Basically, my question, and I ask this every time we adopt the budget. I'm very predictable in this sense, being on the board for a long time. You know that I'm always very concerned organizationally that when we adopt a budget at this level, that the organization as a whole has had an opportunity for input, for involvement in the budget. So it's not mysterious. It's not something we come here today and adopt, but it's something where they've been involved in, where we've gotten their input. So could you describe the process you went through with our total organization to construct this budget?
Sure. In late January, early February, we reach out to all management within CUIAB and provide them about a 30 to 45-day opportunity to request, not only copy machines or new facilities, reduction of facilities, anything large or small they need to request as far as an operating expenditure. They have the opportunity then to make the request, as well as personnel. Each manager submits a justification document that explains, has their current workload, their projected workload, and why they are requesting, be it management services technicians, administrative law judges, et cetera. So we consolidate all of those requests, and upon receipt of them in March, if there are any, if anything isn't justified enough to where you can make a proper determination, then we work specifically with those management members to provide further information if needed. So yeah, they're provided, and even though that's about a 6-week process, it really is year-round that we work with local management, because things change, as you know, especially with regard to staffing needs.
So let me go a little bit deeper. So I heard about the management input. Well, how do the line workers give their input to management?
So I apologize. The management is advised to reach out to all of their line workers, as you said, to all employees for input as to what they need. Obviously, employees aren't necessarily going to provide a lot of input with regard to staffing,
right?
But absolutely with operating expenses. So, for instance, in admin, I have a smaller group. When it's that time of year, I reach out to everyone and say, here's your time to request whatever you feel you may need and we advise all management to do the same statewide.
Yeah. Any other questions from our colleagues?
You want a motion?
Pardon me?
You want a motion?
I think that would be in order.
I'll move to approve the 23-24 budget proposal.
Do we have a
First
second?
motion.
I second.
Do we have a second? So I'll take the roll call. Vice Chair?
I approve.
Member Wachowski?
Aye.
Member Eng?
Ing votes aye.
The chair votes aye, and thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. And thank the board for your good questions and attention to detail. Having done that, let's see where we are on the agenda. I think we are at the portion of the agenda where I turn to our board counsel, esteemed board counsel, and ask him, do we have any matters for consideration in closed session?
Thank you, Chair Allen. We do not.
Having heard that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.